There has been a theme around here for quite some time, not just on Sundays, but throughout every day here at the center. This idea of juxtaposing comfort and courage. And in the times that I have spoken in the last few months, I've never really gone directly to this theme until today. And so what I wanted to do today, and what inspired me, was to bookend this juxtaposition between two ideas, one of them being courage and the other one comfort. And there's two quotes that I want to share with you. And, we talk around here a lot about interfaith and having all of the traditions expressed. And I think I need to get a gold star today, because let me tell you what. The first quote comes from E.E. Cummings, who was a world-class poet who was inspired by Gertrude Stein, who he hung out with. That would be so frickin' cool. Gertrude Stein, man, hanging out with her, and he was inspired by her. Okay, then get this. The second quote is by a gentleman by the name of David O'Mackey, who was at one time the leader of the Mormon Church. Do I get a star or what? I mean, those two people wouldn't even be in the same restaurant. You know what I'm saying? All right, but I put them together. So we're going to start with E.E. Cummings. And this is his definition of courage. He said, "It takes courage to grow up and become who you really are." I love that. All right. And this is what Mr. McKay said. "The greatest comfort in life is having a close relationship with Spirit." God bless his little Mormon heart. That is so great. I love that. I'm about ready to go to the temple. All right. So before I get rolling here, I have to have see if you will allow me to do something. I want to ask you how you feel about something. I want to bring up the word and it just, now, oh, I know what it is. I want to bring up the word weird. Okay. Now, in our political discourse, that has become kind of a bad word right now. It's being kicked around by people. And I come from the standpoint that there are very few words that are either good or bad. I think they're neutral. I think but the power comes from what we do with them. And so I want to ask you, would it be safe for me to assume that you guys might be uncomfortable with the word weird? No? You guys are down with weird? I love that. Yes, that's my point. I pulled up behind a truck one day, and there's a bumper sticker. My car sits kind of low. There's a bumper sticker like up on the camper shell, and it says, "Stay weird, you weirdo." And I thought, how did they know I would be behind them? I love that. Okay. All right, so we're good. I was trying to come up with, that's why my gears were jamming, because I've been thinking all morning, what word can I put in there that would be like nicer than weird, Okay. All right, so there's a gentleman by the name of Gordon White who has podcasts, and I picked him up on YouTube. I haven't joined any of his Patreon or any of that stuff. First of all, I don't know how, but I'm lucky I can answer my phone, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, but I watch his stuff, and he is on the outskirts of metaphysics. He's way out there. And he's like the way out frontier of metaphysics. And I watch him, and some of his stuff is well over an hour long, and I just got to get into it. And some of it I don't necessarily agree with, and some of it is interesting. And he's just really out there. He pushes the envelope, and he lives somewhere in Australia. And so what his podcast generally is every once in a while he's on by himself, and he kind of does some teaching about some ideas. But a lot of times he has on guests, from all, how these podcasts are. Someone is sitting in their living room with a big mic, and he's somewhere in the big mic, and they're talking. And a lot of these people I'm not necessarily familiar with, writers and teachers and people with amazing ideas and professors once in a while. And so he always starts off with the same question, and I love this question. He asks the person, he says, "Tell me what made you a weird kid?" I love that. I can so relate to that. It's like, me. I'll tell you what made me a weird kid. And what's really interesting is that, so what the question, tell me about your spiritual journey. Tell me where you started. And it's interesting. You go, okay, I'll give you my standard question. I ask everybody, tell me about your weird kid moment. Tell me what made you a weird kid. And they'll sit there for a moment, and so you can tell it's like, you know what, I was a weird kid. You're right about that, right? And so then they start, and I love the stories they tell. And they run the gamut of, there could have maybe been a tragedy early in life and the way they responded it or made their way through, or they were born into a religious family and it just didn't fit for them. And so they would go to the public library, or because a lot of them are like my age and stuff. And, now younger people would be internet and they found websites and stuff like that. Or, all the other kids didn't understand me because all I did was walk around the woods and look at stuff. Or, I didn't like sports. I spent all my time in the library. Or, my parents broke up and, my mom had to work a lot. And so I found myself reading all kinds of different books. And some of them are interesting. Like I had a grandfather who, he was into poetry and gardening, and he would talk to his plants. And then when I was pretty young, he passed away, and I walked into his garden and I felt lost, and so I began my journey. And so what this reminds me of, or what this makes me aware of, is that almost in every single case, what comes up with all these people, and what I can relate to, is the idea of dissonance. In other words, somehow there's a rub with what's going on outside and a rub with what's going on inside. And so I looked up a definition of dissonance. And the dissonance comes from the musical world. And the definition is a tension or clash resulting from the combination of two disharmonious or unsuitable elements or constructs. Someone hit the wrong note. That's what it means, all right? Somehow the note within a song or a piece, ding, and we all hear it, right? There's a dissonance. And so basically, what this reminds me of is, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, if that's okay. Years ago, after I had found science of mine, religious science, and once I found it, the very first time I ever walked into a center, I was in my first class that week, and I took classes for a very long time. And so I'd gone through classes, and I had all kinds of teachers. I had Alice Ross, I had Judith Churchman, I had Christine Jeffers, I had Carolyn McEwen Fish. But, and so, in fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about Carolyn. She's part of this story. So anyway, I worked my way up. I mean, I didn't know I was working my way up. I was just taking classes, and I would repeat them sometimes, and I just really got off on it. And I was so yearning for it, and I was such a kind of a mess when I found religious science. It was my way of, kind of definitely my way of straightening out my life. It wasn't it definitely was. So anyway, I was going along, and then Judith Churchman, who was my minister at the time, she had come west from Florida. She spent some time in Northern California, then she went back to Florida. That's where she is now. And I love her very dearly. She got me through a lot of hard times. And so Judith wanted me to become a practitioner, but there weren't enough people in Paradise to do the class, and so she reached out to Dr. Carolyn, because Dr. Carolyn was putting together a class, and to see if I could join that class. And so they got all the paperwork together, and I think Dr. Carolyn interviewed me. But Judith was so maternal. I love her so much. It was kind of like she was sending me off to kindergarten. And it was that thing of, she wanted to make sure I had my crayons in my backpack. But to put it in these terms, she said, Andy, I want to, being in classes, she heard my story. I came to religious science first time. I don't know what I heard, but whatever it was, I kept coming back. And so she heard that story. And so she was talking to me one day, and it wasn't long before I was going to start the practitioner class with Carolyn, who was one of the best teachers I ever had. Carolyn was it. She was the gold. I'm telling you. As a minister, I take more out of what she taught me as a practitioner than what I got in ministerial. I mean, she was amazing. So I want to say that. And she was so good to me. So Judith had a background in therapy. She was a licensed therapist, and besides being a minister. And so she had a really good way of weaseling stuff out of people, And weaseling, I like that. If you're a counselor, you're a weaseler. Okay. For any of you who don't know me, I am a counselor, and I'm the weaseliest you can imagine. Okay. So anyway, so she was talking to me, and she said, I want to ask you about what you heard. I don't know what you. No, Andy, I want to ask you. And she really pushed me on this, and we had spent a couple of times together, and she just was on this like a chicken on a bug. You know what I'm saying? And so she said, so she started to get into my childhood, and so she asked me what my religious groundings were. And I said, well, I was raised a Baptist in Christianity, and it wasn't my thing, and I got away from it, and no, I want to go back to your child. I want to go back to when you were childhood in that. I want to go, because that's when we, as children, we're like sponges. That's where the stuff really comes in, right? That's where we soak up the most, and you want to talk about consciousness work, there it is. So I want to know about being a child. So I grew up until I was the age of 10, I grew up in the absolute wilderness. I grew up in a PG&E camp up the Feather River Canyon in the Sierra watershed, and so it was an old company town, and those aren't around anymore, and that place is long gone. But I grew up there, and so they had formulated this beautiful little village, sidewalks, streetlights, streets, sewers, all this stuff. It was like you were in this little town, but 1 inch out of the beyond a lawn, and you were into rattlesnakes, and you were into herons and poison oak, and it was all out there. And so as a kid, I ran around out there in that wilderness. I have no idea why I wasn't bitten by snakes a million times, but I just ran around, just like crazy, hair lick hair, and cow lick hair and stuff. And so anyway, I grew up in that wilderness. At the same time in my life, I was spending time every week in a Baptist church, and with the choirs and the preacher and the fire and brimstone and the salvation and the revelation and all that stuff. And I'm not here today to be just overtly critical of it, but first of all, I got to tell you, when I was a little kid, I just absolutely loved the idea of religion. I literally sat on the front stoop in front of that preacher, and they had this thing called junior church, and I would not go. I wanted to listen to him. I wanted to listen, and everyone thought I was weird. Andy doesn't go to the junior church. No, I want to be here, and I actually wanted to go to prayer meeting. You got to be nuts to do that. You know what I'm saying? And so I would go, and I wanted to hear this stuff. But I remember I reached a certain age, and it frightened me. Heaven or hell, salvation, the Old Testament stuff. Because you mean after someday when I die, my sister may not be there, I may not be there. That whole thing. It was to me, it was just reeked of abandonment. It just reeked of something that just blew my mind, eternity and some sort of suffering. I was a little kid, and I'd ask my mom about it, and say, what's up with this? Well, you just better make sure you have salvation. I did that too. I did the altar call and stuff, and I was good for a couple weeks, and I started taking cookies again and stuff, and I started hating my sister, and I was worried about, because I knew that was sin, right? And so I wanted a card. Can I have this in my wallet that I'm saved? And, no, Andy. My mom said to me, it depends on how heartfelt. Heartfelt? What are you talking? I couldn't relate to heartfelt. What do you mean? Oh my God, And so I was frightened. And so what I did was, I found out there in the forest, where I started talking to trees and to animals, and I started talking to, I guess, imagined friends or whatever, and began to share that experience out loud. Anyway, I got in quite the habit of talking when nobody was there. And so one week, we go to church. Remember, I sat on the front row. And so it was a kind of a long room. The sanctuary was a long room, stage up. And there wasn't a stitch of carpet in that building. It was all tile floor, so it was very echoey, cinder block building. And the two bathrooms, men's and women's, were right on the back wall. So I get up halfway through, and I trottle back there and go in the men's room. And I start talking to whoever. And I guess it was very echoey. So I'm done, and I'm having my conversation. I come out, and I open the door, and there were probably 100 people that day, faces back. The preacher was looking at me, not saying a word. So even back then, I wanted to get up on the... Anyway. Oh, my mom was horrified. And for a really long time after that, I was the kid that people go, "So Andy, who you been talking to lately?" That was a running joke. So Judith, in her very talented and loving way, said, "Andy, I really believe that when you came to religious science for the first time, what you heard was the prayer." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You wanted unity. Duality frightened you. You wanted God to be. You wanted God to be all there is. And the first time you walked into a church and you heard the prayer, you probably went right back there." Oh my God. I started to cry because when I got old enough, I could not run out of those churches fast enough. I went to war with God. I called myself an atheist. I wanted nothing to do with religion. I was angry, resentful, frightened. And so I go into a religious science church, and I hear what I had been looking for, literally going back to being a child. I want you to think about the power from a religious context of unification. God's out there somewhere. He's looking at you. He, on a throne. This is the drill. These are the 10 Commandments. This is all this stuff. And to feel so cut off and alienated from that. And to come into a place where we say, God is all there is. God, you are in God. God is in you. And God is love, period. Oh my God. That's what put the hook into me. We live in a time, our human species has evolved to a place, personally and also collectively and in a community way, to where we have come to a place to where something that's been going on with human beings for a very long time is now being talked about openly, and we all hear this all the time, and we can all relate to it. And it comes to us from the gender and sexuality world, where people will say, what is in my material presentation is not really who I am. That gender, the sexual gender roles that you sell me on, they're not actually who I am. There's something else inside. There's a dissonance. A dissonance that puts my interior in conflict with the material. And so what's beautiful about that movement coming up in our time around gender and sexuality issues is it sheds a light on all kinds of people, whether it's religious, political, cultural, whatever, and say, wow, I have been in dissonance with how I've been living. Little Andy was in dissonance of the religion he was being raised in. Now, by consciousness, why did he come here and get involved in that? That's a really good question. I've been working out for a long time. I'll let you know how that goes. But the fact of the matter is that the fact that I was able to manifest in my life the ability to walk into a place like this and hear unification. So when we talk about manifesting, there's three pieces that I want to talk about. The first one is dissonance, and we already talked about that. There's a gentleman by the name of Leon Festinger who talks about dissonance, and he says, when dissonance is present, in addition to trying to reduce it, a person should instinctively and actively avoid actions and information which would likely increase that dissonance. I love that. Come into a religious science church. Move into the healing. There's an old saying, prayer in our movement can be called treatment, and there's an old saying, treat and move your feet, right? Start moving beyond the dissonance. The second part of it, in terms of moving forward, is discernment. And I want to read a quote, and I cut this quote into two places. The top part, the two sentences, comes from Unity. The bottom two sentences comes from Ernest Holmes, who's our founder. And I put them together. I hope they're okay with that. All right. Okay. Discernment, to lay hold of through understanding that which is hidden beneath the materials, established rules of life and order, and apprehending the truth of being, looking through appearances and beholding the realities of spiritual expression. That's me talking to somebody in the bathroom. I was trying to find something, right? And so the famous author Anonymous said this about discernment. The first act of wisdom is to discern that which is false. The second is to know that which is true. To move away from the false material expression and to move into the truth of who and what we are. And the last piece I want to give you, this is three pieces, is imagination. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, said, of all the properties of being a mental human being in terms of change, transition, evolution, he said all of them are dwarfed by imagination. He said imagination is what is the energy in terms of moving our lives in the direction we want to move them. And so, once again, I've got a quote. The top part is Holmes, the bottom part is Unity. And so starting off, Holmes says of imagination, a tapping of the very roots of the divine, using the same power that brought forth the universe. And the bottom part, and opens the channel of spirit direction with us. A power that plays an important, dare we say essential, part of that union. What's the union? Spirit and us. And what Unity is saying is imagination drives that completely. Who is your God? I was thinking this week about it. If someone said, Andy, describe your God to me. I don't know if I could do that. But I know how it feels. And I know the relationship. And my imagination is all over that. If I could get you in here, you would be amazed at the movie I have of God. I love it. Get some popcorn, we'll try and put it on the screen, right? Okay. So with imagination, I want to give you a quote. This is from John Lennon. Imagination is the soil that brings dreams to life. Reality leaves a lot to the imagination. Reality leaves a lot to the imagination. But in order to get there, you got to be weird. And you got to embrace your weirdness. And so today I honor our weirdness. Thank you very much.